Hello, and welcome to the Wade Borth Podcast. I'm your host, Wade Borth, and in every episode, my goal is to get you to think differently about how money works and ultimately to empower you to take control of your money and your personal financing system. Hello, welcome back to the Wade Borth Podcast. Today, I have a new friend and a special guest, Joshua Smith. I love the name, by the way, Joshua. That's my son's name. So, again, you probably go by Josh, maybe, or Joshua. It probably doesn't make any difference to you if you're like my son.
Joshua, Smitty.
Yes, Smitty, yeah, I never thought about that one. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining me on my podcast today. I'm excited about the conversation that we're going to have today. So thanks so much for taking the time out to join me.
Happy to be here, and thanks for the opportunity to come on and hang out with you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So what's really got me excited about, for the listeners, for Joshua, is a couple of things. He's one of our new advisors at Factum. I love the fact of his energy, kind of his commitment to what he's going to want to do. But more importantly, it's the story that I hear in him, the why. It's always interesting to see when people make career changes and what's happening in their life and what about this idea of controlling the banking function in your life or helping other people on top of that to go there. Again, I think we have to internalize it first. Right? We have to say, why is it important to us and why are we doing it in our lives? And that it's so impactful that it's wanting you to go out and say, hey, I want to go out and help other people as well. I want to go serve your community or your people that are meant to hear this message. And so as we get into it, I just would say, thank you for sharing your story. It's sometimes not always easy to encapsulate that story into something that's understandable, because sometimes we don't understand it in ourselves until we kind of go through it and make a commitment. And then once we understand it, then it's very easy and the path becomes very clear. And so I think that's kind of where you're at right now, is like you've gone through an event, trials and tribulations, or whatever it might be. And so we'll kind of delve into that a little bit, and I want to hear a little bit more about you. So again, thank you for the listeners for just hearing Josh's story as we go through this, and just to appreciate the journey, because we've all been on a journey. And it's funny, is like, as I've talked to people, clients, I've talked to other agents, other people I've had on my podcast, we've all gone through a journey, and they're all unique, but they're all very similar. Not all similar, but most are very similar, and they have a lot of commonalities behind it. So we want to pull those out. So if you think about this and like, am I alone in my journey? Am I alone in my thought process? I'm going to tell you right now that the answer is no. There's a lot of commonality that comes out in a lot of conversations. And Joshua, you've taken it, you're going to take it to a higher level. You're going to go take this message and this journey you're on, and you're going to go out and serve other people with that same enthusiasm and the messaging in your why. And so we're going to talk a little bit about your why. So maybe real quick, Josh, maybe just give me a quick background on who you are and what led you up to about a year ago in the conversations, and then we'll kind of delve a little bit deeper into that.
Perfect, man. No, I think I appreciate the opportunity again, Wade, for having me on and tell my story, because I think hopefully it inspires other people. Like you said, we'll get into it a little later, but definitely just went through a major life event and like a midlife career change, which isn't always easy to do. But I kind of think of myself, I go back to '08. I'm kind of the tale of two influencers, if you will. And I'll explain that as we go into the story. But back in '08, my wife and I had just sold our first townhome that we moved into, brand new. Got a check for $35,000. Thought, whoa, this is the most money I've ever seen in my life. This real estate gig's pretty cool. I'm kind of an expert. Bought my first house, and now I'm moving up in the world. So we ended up buying a fix and flip. And at the time we were in Salt Lake City. Bought a fix and flip that we thought was a 2-year plan. We would just live in it for a couple years, fix it up as we went along. And at the same time, we formed a partnership with a couple friends, and we bought another house that we had no business buying, full out predatory loan. You know, if you've ever watched that movie, The Big Short, that I was the guy signing the papers going like, man, is this really, like, I don't make that much. Like, are you sure? 100% interest only loan. Like, is that legit? I'm asking all these questions at the table, knowing in my gut, walk away, don't sign this. But we went forward, bought a house we had no business owning, just no way should we afford that house. That was a second flip. So we were kind of living in one flip and then doing another flip with a couple of friends, and neither one of them went well, right? So that was in '07, leading up to '08. We were trying to catch a falling knife at that point. The market was on its way down. Our realtor at the time that was representing us had no insight he wasn't ahead of the game. So it was left to us to just try to cut it. Well, we ended up short selling that house. We hung on to our primary residence, but at a significant loss. We ended up selling that house for like, I think a $3,000 loss. And we lived in it for not 2 years, but 7. And at that time, there's tons of turmoil. Obviously, I stepped back and went, okay, I don't know the real estate game and I don't even know money at all. So like, what do I do? And that's where the first influencer of my life came into play. That was Dave Ramsey. So I found the Financial Peace book, went through it, went gun ho. My wife and I actually ended up bringing that to 2 churches that we taught that course in. And it really did help personally, like with the budgeting, right? The envelope system. I mean, we did it all. We did the whole 9 yards. What got me to the tail of the second influencer was fast forward 10 years of my life, and I got the term insurance. I'm doing everything. I'm trying to pay my loan off on my house. Like that was the only debt we had at the time. For a long time, we weren't using credit cards. We were doing all that, right? So I came across, I think we were on a road trip to Arizona to go visit my wife's family, and I listened to Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, and that's the second influencer. Yeah, I loved it. So I'm like, man, I've heard some of these principles, but it just, something clicked. And so eventually we moved down to Arizona. We moved back here in 2020, right at the peak of COVID. And when we got here, I was still in the, hey, 10-year fixed loan, let's pay this thing off. Like I took all of our equity from the property that we sold up in Washington where we lived at the time, tucked it all into our new house here in Arizona, and was on that 10-year fixed. Well, then the Fed started raising the rates. And here I am listening to Robert Kiyosaki. I'm kind of having flashbacks to high interest rates back in the '08 days where my bank account was like, I was getting 5% interest back then. That was cool. Right. But now I know a little bit more about how money works. And Robert Kiyosaki's like, he's always holding up the dollar bill going, hey, this is a debt note. This is pretty much trash, but it's worth the money it's printed on, which is paper. So it's going to lose its value of purchasing power. So when I saw the Fed start raising the rates, I immediately was like, man, I don't want to be sitting on my house equity and have nothing to show for it. If we have another '08 reset where the home values go down 40, 50%, how do I take, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I don't mean to interrupt, but you make a really good point, and I want to make sure that the listeners and people that listen to this kind of understand that. You were sitting in a position where I think I see a lot of people sit into. It's like, hey, I have no debt, but I also have no liquidity.
No liquidity. No.
And because it's like, pay the house down. It's like, I hear Nelson talking about, when he talks about economic value added, he says the reason why that fails is because people try to take that and implement it too fast, just like most things. We're not educated on it enough. We think we are until an event happens. And so that's when we really get educated. The School of Hard Knocks is truly a school of hard knocks. It's unforgiving and it's ruthless.
Yeah, 100%.
And so to your point, it's like, hey, having no debt's great, but having no equity's awful.
Yeah, it's worse. Well,
yeah.
And as I learned more about how money works, and like our system is truly a debt system, right? Like we only print more money when there's new debt issued. So like once I started learning this, I'm like, I don't really like HELOCs because I don't want to put, a home equity line of credit on my home and then that's my collateral. If I don't perform on that loan, they just take my house. I don't want that position. And there's a variable rate in a lot of those. So I was like, So
and
I started thinking
guaranteed either.
Exactly. It's not even guaranteed. They can yank that thing away from you on a moment's notice if they need to. And so no control. I don't want my house up for collateral. So I knew at that point, okay, interest rates are coming up. I have now in my mind an asset with a debt note at like under 3%. I think my home mortgage was like 2.75. And I was like, that's worth gold, right? You can't find that anymore. That like everybody appreciates those now. So as the Fed was aggressively hiking the rates, I went, okay, I'm going to do a cash out refi. I'm not going to pay any tax on that money because it's debt. I'm going to rewrite my note from a 10-year to a 30-year. And a lot of people that might be Ramsey fans are rolling over right now because that is not what you do. But I was able to refi it. I was sub 5. So they raked up they hiked up the rates really quick. So I was a little bit slow to the game, but I was like, man, I want my equity out and I want to go move this money and make it work for me. And I want to buy a cash flowing asset. And in my mind at that time, it was real estate, right? Can I get a duplex, triplex, fourplex, something small to start with? Well, I'm in Phoenix and prices were going through the moon, right? It was crazy. So I sat on that cash. And at that time, I actually had it was my son's friend. I was going to drop my son Elias off at his friend's house, and his dad started talking to me about, hey, why don't you park your money in like whole life and it grows in two places at once? And basically he was describing to me like what I came known later as IBC, infinite banking. But at that time I thought, what is he talking about? Like, A, I don't like whole life because Dave told me not to, right?
Right.
Like I've
Yep.
read the books, I know everything. Like term, yeah, I'd never do whole life. So I thought it sounded more like a scam than anything. I was very like my radar was up, and I drove away thinking like, that's weird. Well, about 3, maybe 4 months later, I was on YouTube redacted news channel. I watch Natalie and Clayton Morris. I've been watching them for years and got a really good channel. So shout out to them. But he also has Morris Investments channel, and somehow on my feed that came up, and there's a young guy on there, Nate Scott, talking about infinite banking, and everything started like going off in my mind. Like, that's what Elias's friend's dad was talking about. Like, I know this. So I started listening pretty intently, and that led me on like a 6-month journey where, I just started listening to podcasts and trying to piece it all together, like make the puzzle work. I listened to Nelson Nash's book, Becoming Your Own Banker, like 3 times on audio, just trying to, like, the paradigm shift started happening at that point. And that's when it dawned on me, like, man, I got like some equity that I'm sitting on waiting to deploy it. Let me start funding a policy and see how this works. And so that was our first policy. And literally within like 2 months, I'm like at work, I'm like, okay, I have a 401k. Like, I'm going to stop contributing to that, and I'm going to fund my wife's second policy with that. So that was a personal decision I made, not financial advice, but I just saw the value in it pretty quick after I did my research.
Let me ask you, what value did you see there? That's a great point to be made. What was the value that you saw? I mean, because a couple of things there. Getting out of debt, controlling your debt is a huge step. Kudos to anybody that can teach that. Fabulous. But what's next is always the question. That's always where I think a lot of people are left kind of like wandering once they've found that little bit of peace, right? What's next?
100%. Yeah.
And then, so when you say you saw the value, I'm just curious what you saw as value.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many value. Like, whole life, I always had like a bad taste in my mouth, right? Like, there is a lot of, I would say, garbage products in the insurance industry, and I think we have kind of a bad rap in, I don't know, IULs, Universal Life, some of this stuff where the levers are controlled by the insurance company. So I went into it very skeptical. But once I started learning about the living benefits, like the death benefit's one thing, that's going to bless my heirs. My children's children are going to get an inheritance from that death benefit, which is
Right.
huge. So that's one benefit. But all the living benefits that, like earlier you mentioned liquidity, like now I have a place to save my money where it can grow at a guaranteed rate. I don't have to worry about it. That grows without me doing anything, tax deferred. There's so many benefits that like now I have access to control that money. So when I talk about pulling out stopping my 401k contributions, the reason I came to that conclusion was like Nelson makes a great point in his book, right? In Becoming Your Own Banker, when he says, hey, the government has created an issue called overtaxation, and then they present you, the consumer, with a solution to go park your money in this tax deferred account, a qualified plan. Doesn't that raise suspicion in your mind? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, yeah, it kind of does. Like a little bit.
Well, boy, there's so much. I mean, we could do I've done multiple podcasts talking about that whole issue, right? It's like, what are today's taxes the cheapest we're ever going to have? Possibly
Yeah.
so. I mean, you
Yeah.
look at $36 trillion in debt. Is this the cheapest tax rates we're ever going to have? No matter who's in the administration, it might be. But that's not the point. I guess the bigger point is when you said you saw value, and now we've had a lot of other conversations. We talk about, with the fact we talk about there's 8 benefits to this whole life. And again, a lot of people in like the 401ks, they get one benefit, right? They may get a rate of
Yeah.
return, but they don't get, there's no certainty. There's no a level of certainty, again, that and the liquidity and all those other things that are super important. There's just one benefit versus a place that you have 8 benefits and really like solidifying your foundation.
Yeah. And I would even say with whole life, there's probably closer to like 20 benefits, right? Like when you really delve into it, there's so many more, but like those 8 that you mentioned that we at Factum really like look at are just major, right? I mean,
Right.
like I have a loan provision. We've used 2 loans on our policies and they're fantastic. Like I have an unstructured loan that an interest only unstructured loan. Like what bank could you go into and say, hey, Chase, I need a loan right now at 6%, 5%, whatever the going rate is with the insurance company. I need that fixed forever, and I might not pay it back ever. Like, I'm just going to pay my interest on that. Like, how's that sound? They're going to go, we don't offer that. Like, we don't
Well,
have
because
that.
they don't have a price for that. They're just like it's completely off their radar. And on top of that, and I think this is the part that I hear people they don't appreciate until you've lived it, right? Until they've lived like what you live, like going through the '08 with your, it's a guaranteed line of credit.
Yeah. Yes. And at that point, like going back to '08, if I needed money out of my 401k, I could have leveraged my 401k and taken that up to $50,000 out, right? I can take that
Right.
money out, but now that money's not growing for me in my 401k. It's now in my possession. And then, yes, I'm going to pay it back with interest, right? But if I lose my job, like
Or you get laid off.
I get laid off, which I just went through, like personally, like that loan, if I have a $50,000 loan out, that's now due up on the next tax cycle. So, like,
And if
what are
you
you
don't
going to
pay it,
do?
you have to pay taxes. You have to pay the tax on it and the 10%
100%.
penalty. And again, all their handcuffs are again the government created that environment, and so they control the environment. I said they created the game, they created the rules, so it's up to them to rewrite the rules whenever they see fit. So you
100%.
have to play
And
by the
Nelson
rules.
makes that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but Nelson makes
Yeah.
a great point in the book too, where he's like, it's their playbook, and they can change the rules at any time. And with our national debt where it's at, like, what better place to go and rewrite some rules to gain access to the trillions of dollars that we as Americans are putting in these qualified plans at a moment's
Yeah.
whim, right?
Yeah.
If they want, they can, right?
Yeah. So now, with all that being said, because like we talked about, you can take loans, that whole thing with 401k. Take us to the next step, the next transition, next event in your life that we just
Yeah,
briefly
so
mentioned a second ago.
we were building our own banking system. Like right now, we have the two policies, my wife and I, and we were just slowly capitalizing that. This isn't like a get rich quick scheme or anything crazy. It's a long play. It's a whole life policy, right? So we're funding that year over year, watching it just kind of grow. And about what October, I found out news from a job that I held for almost 21 years that I was going to be laid off, and that was at first pretty stressful. I'm pretty freaked out, but then once we started looking at our financial situation, we quickly determined, hey, we have tough money sitting over here. We have a lot of cash value set up where if needed, we could tap into that, borrow from it whenever we need it, and live off it if it comes to that, right? But we had structures in place to where that layoff became not a catastrophic event in our lives or in our marriage or in our household even. It
Right.
was just, okay, what do we do next? And that's where it was like I learned about you guys. Actually, God's timing was perfect. End of September, I went to a Tough Money seminar that a friend of ours that invited me to. Didn't even know that I was an infinite banker at the time, but it was like, hey, this is awesome. These guys are in my backyard. We're in Mesa and I live in Gilbert. So no, that was huge timing for that. So that was amazing. So
Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
partnered with you guys soon after that.
Yeah, we call that God's instances, right?
Yeah,
It's
totally.
not coincidence at all. It was meant to be. But I want to go back a little bit to what you mentioned. I mean, that time when because here's what happens. At least what I see is like the moment you hear that you're getting laid off, your job is not going to be yours anymore. A
Yeah.
couple of things run through your brain, and again, it's like learning about this idea of controlling the banking function of my life. That it's like you go through stages of grief. It's like
Yeah.
in denial, then you have to go through anger and all those stages that you go through. When you learn something, when something that changes your paradigm, you fight it like crazy because you're like, it can't be true.
This isn't
And we
happening
all
to
go
me.
through it at one stage or another. And I love to tell a story about when I was a kid and I grew up in Wimbledon. I don't know if you ever heard that story. I
Yeah.
did a podcast. And once I learned that Wimbledon, North Dakota didn't hold the Wimbledon tennis championship, that was actually over in Wimbledon, England. At age 13, I was angry and I was like mad and I was like disgusted and disbelieved. And this all happened within about 5 minutes. In the kids' world, it was much bigger than that. But it was just funny because it's the same thing. It's like when you learn about this, like, oh, and then when you go through, now, again, that was a small example. But the point is, like, I don't know what's going on. So let me figure it out. So when you went through that moment when you found out you're not going to have a job anymore. Now you lose your identity, right? You're
Yeah.
like, oh, this is what I've been doing. This is who I am. What are we going to do for money? So you went through a lot of uncertainty. It might have been for a very short period of time, that thought process, but what was it like to be able to look back and go, oh, wait a second. We have tough money. We have money. We have reserves. We have the ability to survive this. And really, quite frankly, Maybe it was the thing that was meant to be so we could go do another mission, what our purpose is, go live our purpose.
Yeah, well, what was interesting, again, going back to the timing of it all, was like towards the end of September, I went to a Tough Money event, and
Mm-hmm.
in that event, I'm filling out stuff that I have some good grasp on my financials, but there was some gaps there that the Tough Money curriculum helped me go through, and one of them was like my daily burn rate, right? My days
Mm-hmm.
liquidity. Like I didn't know these things off the top of my head. Like how many days liquidity do I have? Well, when I'm mapping that all out and writing it down and seeing my financial situation, it became evident at that point, like, okay, we've got some liquidity because of the whole life policies and our savings. I kind of went back to that and opened that up and sat down with my wife and went like, here's our situation. So like with the tough money that we built within these policies that we hold, we're okay. Like we're not going to be wondering what we're going to put food on the table if I don't get a job or there's not finances coming in, whatever. But it really came down to days of liquidity. Like knowing that number really set us at peace to go, yes, there is stress. Yes, there is the like, this is happening to me, like anguish, just the unbelief of the whole thing. But once the dust settled from that, it was nice to just pull that out and go, wait a minute, we just went through something like this about a few weeks ago. Like, hold on, let me flip to that page. I know I wrote something down. And yeah, having that at my fingertips was just huge.
Yeah, and I've said this many times on the podcast before. So again, if you haven't listened to the Wade Borth Podcast, this is your first time, go back and listen to some of the previous episodes, because we talk about when we have clarity, it brings certainty in our life, right? So that's really what we're talking about. It's like, how do we bring a little bit more certainty? And again, it's not the policy, it's just our thought process and what we need to do. And really, Josh, I think what you do, what I do with our clients, and really at Factum is help produce a process. What does our process look like, right? It's like it's a thought process. How do we empower people to take control to attain their vision or their goals? That's really what the conversation is. And it really starts with, hey, how much do you know about your financial situation? And can we help you find some clarity there? So when you find that clarity, you're getting some certainty, which brings a peace of mind that a lot of people are looking for. And I think
Yeah,
you know
100%.
you're well on their way to that. And that's actually what it was kind of helped you out so much.
Oh, absolutely. And going back to the tough money conversation, there's 5 questions that were asked during that presentation. I came to know them now, like we use them all the time with clients, but trying to get the Factum 5 is what we call these questions, but it really gets a good framework of like, where are you at? And if you don't know where you're at, that's fine. This is what do we say? Not an event, it's a process, right? This isn't like going to happen overnight. This took me personally, like I was 6, 7 months into the rabbit hole of trying to piece this together before I even decided to do this.
Yeah.
But now looking back, super glad I did, right? Because like we talked about the 8 benefits, like these are huge. And going back to one thing that always stuck in my mind when I was teaching Dave Ramsey's courses was Proverbs 13:22 was like a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. And that always like, I love that verse, but it always bugged me and challenged me in a way that I couldn't like do that. Like, how am I gonna do that? Like that seems like a tall order. Like, am I gonna build an empire? Like, how am I gonna leave my children an inheritance, let alone my grandchildren? And one of the benefits that we talk about, it's the death benefit. And it's not even the one that we're necessarily after when we're building these policies, but that is going to bless my children's children. And when I started learning that, I was like, the light bulb went on one day and I felt this like just immense peace of like, there is a plan, not just for me and my wife and my kids now today, but for generations to come, that this provides immense benefit to. 3-4 years ago, I had no idea this existed. So it feels like a life hack in a way.
Well, and I think there's importance because a lot of times we get stuck on, hey, it's the money.
Yeah.
Which is, again, money solves a lot of problems, but it doesn't solve all the problems, right? Where it starts with is with our mindset and our thought process. And so I always share with clients, and I love this conversation, is like, hey, we can have death benefit, but death benefit, or I'm going to call it liquidity, because it may not even be death benefit. It might be while you're alive, you're tapping into the living benefits. But liquidity without education is just waste. Because, again, how do we expect people to know what to do with the money unless we've been able to educate them? I mean, we think, oh, it's natural. Everybody should know what to do with liquidity. Well, yeah, we're pulled by human behavior, right? We're pulled by, advertising, spend money, invest it, buy a new car, whatever it is. I mean, I've seen it a number of times where clients have received a tremendous amount of death benefit, or the beneficiaries, and within a couple of years it's gone. And it's like, probably shame on me because I didn't do a good enough job of helping them create that family legacy, or that family, we call it family banking, right? What are we doing to empower you, Josh, and your kids? What framework have we set up? And that's really that's why I see your story is like, you're able now to take that, what's happened with in your life, and say, how do I take this and teach, your clients, people maybe that are hearing this, that you're sharing this with Josh. So how do I help them? But more importantly, how do I help their kids and then their kids? What's the structure that we're helping them set up and the framework? Because I think that's the most important thing, is that education, understanding what to do with it once you receive it. And I hear a good friend of mine, David Zapata, he still says this. He says, in the book, Becoming Your Own Banker by Nelson Nash, the key word there is becoming. Who do you have to become to be able to have this family legacy, this family plan? I mean, I think about it from the standpoint of, I want to be the person that 3 generations, 4 generations from now, when I've graduated from this earth and no longer here, they're going to point to the picture on top of the mantle and say, that's the person that started our family legacy.
Started this all, yeah.
Yeah. And so it has to start somewhere. And then it starts with you, and it really starts with anybody that's listening to this, that they can reach out to you and connect with you and say, how do I have some of that? And we have a whole planning process that goes around that with Tough Money. We also believe in family banking. And just really, it's not about a product. Quite frankly, it's the least important thing is the product. It's the process and the mindset around how we think. And then working with somebody like you, Josh, that can guide them through that. Because again, it's their journey. But again, you wouldn't take on Mount Everest without a Sherpa. You wouldn't take on a huge, I love the hunt, so I love having a guide because it helps you so much. You don't have to stumble and fall so many times. So as you go along, you just know that that's the real benefit of working with you. But it's like, what does that structure look like? We have what's called the fact and way. We have a whole plan on how this could play out. And again, it's to help empower you, not to direct you. That's the key. It's like,
and that's why
you play it out.
Well, I'm super excited that I found you when I did, because, and this isn't like an infomercial for Tough Money, but we keep coming back to it because it is the framework. Because my wife and I, like I said, we were practicing this a couple of years ago, just personally. We didn't even know Factum existed, right? So we were dealing with another company, which was great. But the framework wasn't there. So did I want to teach my kids about infinite banking? Absolutely. Did I know where to start? No, not. I mean, other than, hey, this is what we're doing in a general sense, but how do I plug them into this? No idea. Now with Tough Money, I brought my kids, a couple of my older boys, to the presentations because I'm like, fill out this book, know what your money's doing. What are we going to do? So our goal now is to get policies on each of our kids, small policies to start out with, but money that flows through their life can now be parked into a policy. So that's a goal for this year. Set up policies for each of them that when they have money coming in, now they have a way to put that money into a policy, capture it forever. And at their age, what is that going to look like in 20, 30, 40 years when that policy's matured? Even a small policy.
80 years, right? Yeah. But I mean, small, but it's about ownership. What I find is like, when you have ownership, man, you pay a lot more attention. So,
well, and what's neat about the whole thing is now that we have a framework with Tough Money, like I have my 14-year-old already going like, Dad, how do I do what you do when I grow up? And that's like music to my ears because he sees the value in what we're doing. And like when I lost my corporate 9-to-5 W-2 job, like I was struck, like I couldn't get over 2 things. I had to do something that I was passionate about. I was already telling people about infinite banking 2 years because I was doing it myself and I saw the value in it. But I also had to do something that would help people. And this was a natural fit because I'm passionate about it, because I'm doing it myself and I see the value in it. But I also see the value that it brings to other people. So I knew when I was laid off, I kind of knew like, this is what I want to do. This is my next path. And it's not easy to make like a midlife career change of direction when you've been in something for 20 plus years. But that's where I'm at because it was that important, right? To serve people, goal with clients is to really serve my clients, right? And not just for a transaction to be, here's your policy. Okay, we're good. Let me know if you have questions, but to really walk them through the 4 stages of IBC that we talk about throughout their life, because it is a journey, right? It's becoming your own banker.
Yeah, it is. It's becoming your own banker. It's like understanding how to incorporate when I look at this, we take a little bit broader approach to it. It's like, let's think about this at a broad spectrum, and then how do we bring it in? And we call it a little bit like the tunnel method. It's like, we see where we want to go, because that's the first thing we talk about is like, what's your vision, what's your values, where do you want to go, and let's think about how we're going to get there, and let's understand what success might look like. That's usually the process that we get into. And once we know that, then we can kind of start eliminating some of the noise around us.
Yeah.
And then having you by the side, and like when they recognize that you're part of the team that can help them get there, again, it starts bringing it back down to a much more narrow focus. And when you start getting that narrow focus, then you know what to do, and you start taking all your energies to get there. And that's what's so exciting, is that this can be a lifelong journey. You have somebody come there, and then once you get to that point, or you get to close, then through our education and a lot of the stuff we have to offer at Factum starts opening up a whole wide world of, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. But we have to kind of narrow our focus, understand where we're going to go, build a pool of capital. And once you've done that, then all kinds of opportunities present themselves.
Yeah, for sure. And I love, I get a lot of questions from clients and potential clients asking like, how do you guys give all your education away? And I'm like, well, we believe in the go-giver framework, right? Like, we want to add value to you. We want to educate you first before we want you to come to your own conclusion if this is right for you. We're not going to sell you or push you into something that you don't understand or you don't even know if you want. That's not how we operate. And I love that about the Factum way, is that we want to just educate. So we've produced so much content, and I've had so many people ask me like, how do you guys give all this away? Like, is there a catch? Is there a gimmick? Like, nope. Just trying to be a go-giver. Like, here you go. Go at your own pace, but here it all is at your fingertips. So that's huge.
Well, absolutely. I mean, quite frankly, and that's the opposite of the scarcity mindset. Is like, we believe, we know that we could, as big as we want to get, as huge of impact as we want to have, I don't know that we can reach everyone. So let's give it away as much as possible. And again, it's about empowering people. And again, when it comes at the end of the day, is we're here to help guide you through that process. We're here to help you with those parts that we're experts on. And then we also know experts in all the other areas, right? So we want to build that solid foundation for people. Because again, you started building that solid foundation. And when you have a solid foundation, the financial pressures that most people go through, especially when they go through a life event like you did with being forced out of a very large corporate company that starts with general and ends with ick. But we kind of joke. But anyhow, so, I mean, you had a great corporate job. It was probably very comfortable, I would imagine.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, a little too comfortable.
Yeah, maybe so. But the point is, these events are going to happen. It's going to happen at some degree. And you're going to have to, like, what am I doing to prepare myself? So what are we doing to prepare my family and our finances for that? Do we have the ability to bend and to roll with it, or are we just going to be cratered by it? And we saw that in 2008. We saw it in 2020, is that people that have money and they're making good money, and if they're not being conscious about it, right, it goes back to parables of the talent, right? So are we being good stewards of God's money, right? Of the gifts he's given us. And if we're just saying, hey, we're going to reinvest, we're going to grow, we don't think about, well, what's the downside? Are we protecting ourselves from the downside? And so it's a thought process that we want to get people into. So
no, absolutely. And like, you see it all around us, right? Like, we go through these ebbs and flows with market cycles all the time. Mm-hmm. And when in our presentations, we often show people like the days of liquidity on average is like 27 days of liquidity for small business owners. That's less than a month of liquidity that they have at their fingertips in case something major happens. How are they going to survive? And it's no different for a small business or a family. Like, if I go through a layoff and I lose my income, what do I do? Like, where's my liquidity at that point? I'm either going to go into a bunch of debt, or I'm going to have tough money that I can rely on. And the great thing is, if I have liquidity, I also have room for opportunity, because if we do have a market downturn, like we see with Warren Buffett sitting on a mountain of cash, he's waiting for something and he's ready to deploy. And I want to be in that position where, with tough money, if something major happens in the economy, which it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, it's going to happen. I want to be able to pounce on deals, right? Like, I want to have that liquidity at my fingertips. And that's where qualified plans and HELOCs and all these other things, like, it might be there kind of, but it's got a lot of ropes that they tie you down with. So
yeah, it's usually there in the good times, but it's not there when the event happens. Or
when the event happens.
Yeah, and we hear this quite often. It's like, oh man, that guy got lucky because he be able to take advantage of an opportunity. Well, that's not really luck. That's preparation.
Preparation. Yeah.
When preparation is opportunity, that's the definition of luck, right?
Well, and
So
you
what do
bring up
we?
a great point. Like, how many opportunities did I let pass by because all my money was tied up in a 401k for all these years, where
Right.
I'm not even listening for opportunities or hearing opportunities because I don't have access to that liquidity. So I'm not even in the game at that point because I don't need to listen to that conversation that those guys are having because
Right.
I need not apply, right?
Yeah, right.
Now,
Yeah. Now you're like, oh, I hear that. Maybe that's something we can do. And then now you have a structure we can say, now let's put it through a filter and see if it makes sense for us, if it fits within our values. Because really, what we're trying to do is help align people's values with their actions.
yeah.
So at the
Well,
end of the day,
and it seems like a lot of deals come to folks with liquidity, right? Like if you're, like
100%.
you said, if you're prepared with some liquidity and access to that and able to deploy it quickly, opportunities find you. Like you don't even have to go looking for them. They just kind of present themselves. And I'm already finding that with groups that I'm a part of that it's like, oh, this guy needs money and this guy needs money and they need loans and they're looking for capital to fund their adventure. And guess what? I have some capital I can lend to you. So
And
opportunities are abundant.
yeah, when you have cash. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you so much. I know we could probably go on for hours, but people in our listening world probably don't want to listen to us for hours. But I'm excited. I mean, you can tell that we're super excited about this message because it is it is transformational. I can hardly say that today. It's transformational once people go through that process. And there's going to be some resistance, there's going to be some doubt and some disbelief. But just embrace that and say, okay, why? And then being curious is super helpful.
Yeah.
Being open to new ideas is super helpful because those are the people that typically will grow. And so, as we close this out, what would be the one message if you could reach everybody in your circle, the people that are what I would call your community of your people? What would be that one message you would want them to hear?
Yeah, I would say start by learning how money works and how to develop tough money habits. If you don't know what that means, like by all means reach out to one of us because
Yeah,
we can help you guide through that. But the savings rate of Americans is less than 5%. It's been like that for decades and decades.
right.
Why are we saving so few? Like so few dollars are being saved. Why? Ask yourself that. Like all the financial gurus, all the experts will say 10% or more. Save 10% or more at a minimum
Yeah,
and we don't do it. And if we don't do it, we're just going to be in the rat race forever, right? Because we're not going to open ourselves up to those opportunities to deploy capital when they present themselves.
right. Yeah, you're never going to win the money game like Robert Kiyosaki says by doing that. And then here's a real great question for people too. And I know I said one more thing and I'll let you go, but that's just how I roll. It's my podcast, right? Do we know the difference between saving and investing? Because I think there's a boy.
I didn't.
If you ask that question, people have a tendency to want to think they're one and the same. But I think there's a real difference. I would just encourage anybody that says, "Can you answer that question with 100% certainty that you know the difference between saving and investing?" And if you can answer that question, if you say, "I don't know what that is," or the other question I would say, if you can't answer this one, is my money getting all the benefits that it deserves in our savings, in the environment that we're saving in? If you can't answer that one with 100% certainty, I would say reach out to Joshua. How do they reach you if they're listening to you and if they're in your circle?
Yeah,
How do they
you can
reach
go to
you?
my website is probably the easiest way. That'll get you access to some of the Factum Foundational videos, and it'll
Mm-hmm.
help me get in contact with you. But that's gogiversolutions.com. So if you go to
GoGiverSolutions.com.
gogiversolutions.com.
Okay.
Yep.
And if they want to drop you an email,
Yeah, you can go joshua.smith@factumfinancial.com.
gotcha. Okay, perfect. So, well, again, thank you so much. I appreciate this. We'll definitely have to have you back on as we go through this journey. I'd love to have you on board. It's super exciting. And then again, your story, like everybody else, it's unique to you, but it has a lot of common characteristics to most people that are out there. They're searching for something. They just don't know where to go. And I'm just saying, if you can't answer those two questions with certainty, reach out to Joshua. You can walk him through that because you've lived it. You've gone through there. You've gone through the crucible, right? You understand what that fire looks like. And so you
Yeah,
can
and
bring
it,
in some
and it
understanding.
and it's a blessing, right? Because this is why God lets us go through these trials to share them with others and see what you've learned through the way. So life's a journey.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, life's a journey, and it's much better when we have other people there alongside of us. So,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
right, man. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to go through this, and just for any of the listeners, again, go back to listen to the rest of the Wade Borth podcast. There's a lot of really good content, and share it with other people. Share it with people like, man, I think there's something here. I need to know it. Josh will help you, build your community, so you can find other people that are thinking like you, just haven't been able to voice it. So.
Yeah.
Thank you so
100%.
much for your time, and we'll catch up with you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Wade. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Take care.
All right. See ya. Bye bye.
If you're enjoying this podcast or know anyone else that might be interested, please be sure to hit the subscribe button and please leave a review. This will help this podcast reach and help more people by ranking higher in searches and ultimately help more people get out of financial bondage. And don't be afraid to share this podcast with your friends and family, as we can be easily found on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.